All right, here is my audience. There you go. Okay, and I'm going to begin by showing you my visual aid that I have here for my audience. It'll appear backwards, but I do have pipe bands in the U.S. I have some pictures of past and present bands, and I'll go over those as well. What are you wearing under your kilt? My husband has been asked that hundreds of times, and depending on his mood, he'll just give a look or make a crude joke. My family is heavily involved with Scottish pipe bands, and with my son being a Scottish snare drummer, my husband is a drumming adjudicator and also a past drum sergeant. I am the executive secretary of the Western United States Pipe Band Association. The history of bagpipe bands goes back several hundred years, going back to Scotland, but it's only in the past 100 years or so that they've been making a prominence in the U.S. According to Roland Berthoff, a professor of history at Washington State University, the first competition in Highland dress was in 1869. When one hears a pipe band, you can't help but be captivated by the sound of the pipes and the drums, bringing the crowds in for a celebratory reason. Today, I'm happy to inform you fine people about the history of bands in the United States, the current dynamic and challenges it holds, and also the fragile future of pipe bands, in hopes of creating an understanding for you of this unique art form. Roland Berthoff wrote a study titled Under the Kilt, Variations on Scottish American Ground in 1982, detailing the history of bands in America. He reveals as early as 1869, pipers were gathering together in their formal Highland dress, as you can see in the visual aid on the right, which included the sporran, which is the little purse, Glengarry, which is the hat, and gillybrogues, which are the shoes, and of course the wool kilt. It wasn't until 1877 that a formal pipe band association was formed on the East Coast and eventually on the West Coast in San Francisco in 1890. After many failed attempts at those associations from growing and keeping a steady stream of interest, it wasn't until 1963 that the Eastern United States Pipe Band Association was formed and remains today. The West Coast has an association called the Western United States Pipe Band Association that was formed a few years after. Per Kevin Conquest of the Western United States Pipe Band Association, the associations were made because players were looking for structure. They were looking for an even playing field and rules to govern the competition between soloists and bands. But before the 1940s, at least a dozen bands were in existence. And in the 50s and 60s is where we're seeing a rapid growth of pipers and drummers, and not necessarily all Scottish. At that time, in the 50s and 60s, there were about 2,300 pipers and 1,200 drummers that made up 180 bands. And of those, per Berthoff, only 7% were Scottish-born, 16% had Scottish parents, with 46% claiming ancestral roots, while one-third had no ties to Scotland. A lot of Jewish and Armenian names were starting to pop up in the band and in the band circle. And summer schools started to be created in the 60s to help encourage the growth of these bands offering instruction. Next, since we briefly discussed the history of pipe bands, I'll now let you know the current atmosphere in America today. Being heavily involved in WSPBA, I'm responsible for communicating with the approximately 60 bands in California, Arizona, Utah, New Mexico, Oregon, and we also have Idaho as well and Wyoming, but there's not too much activity up there. With the availability of Skype and the internet, more than ever can I connect with players, instructors, and judges, allowing pipe bands to recruit, to thrive, to get education and the tools needed to be successful. Offering workshops and supporting the many Highland festivals is one big thing about the associations. One big festival that helps kind of bring all that in together is Winter Storm. It's a competition and workshop held in Kansas City every January. And per Pipes and Drums magazine, every January since 2002, Winter Storm is the center of the piping and drumming world for 72 hours. This has been possible because of the strong presence of the associations, but also the increased number of players. And now we're looking at about 4,000 players in the United States. And although the large number of players may seem healthy and the opportunities are in abundance, bands are finding it very hard to recruit new players, which will lead me into my next point about the future of pipe bands. Offering help to festivals, which brings the public more knowledge about pipe bands, is increasingly important with the associations. It's very expensive to run a festival, and associations are there to help with advertising and help with funding even for some of these festivals. But the biggest part that associations need to help with and are actively helping with is recruiting young players. Without young players, this art form dies, and without kids getting involved in piping and drumming from early age, it creates a hardship for bands that are seeking new players. So right now the associations are gathering together in a group called the ANAPABA, which is the Alliance of North American Pipe Band Associations, which gathers presidents from Canada, the U.S., as well as New Zealand, the Royal Pipe Band Association in Scotland, and South America, trying to recruit young players into this art form because it's very fragile right now. Last thing that does help increase interest in playing bagpipes and drums are shows like Outlander, who will show Scotland in a more romanticized way. So you'll have an increase in people in going to festivals and saying, I want to wear a kilt. And so we really rely and we really love shows like that. Movies like Braveheart saw an influx of interest in the pipe bands. So today I have discussed the early beginnings of bands in America strongly held by Scottish immigrants and eventually finding its way to people of various backgrounds, as well as the current active environment and opportunity for players. I've also discussed the future of continuing the traditions, encouraging people to begin playing, and the importance of continuing to attend festivals. I implore you to investigate your local bands, whether you're going to go hear them play, attending the Highland Games, or even donating to them. Even more so if you have the musical itch to try your hand in learning the pipes and drums yourself. Maybe then you yourself can answer the age-old question of what are you wearing under your kilt. Thank you. And there's my audience.